Warning, listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. Today we're going to talk about one of the great ironies that's really strikes me when we think about the term success. When we think about successful people, a lot of times we think in terms of financial success. We think of professional success, academic success. And one of the things that seems to happen to folks that find success in those areas is there seems to be a kind of counterbalance with their personal success. Because I've known a lot of people that have that success. They have that financial, that professional, they're leaders, they own companies, or they are CEOs or high managers in their companies. But for some reason, personal success, specifically in their relationships, seems to elude them. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, because my guest is Sherica Matthews. She is a life coach, a relationship expert, and the creator of Feminine Success Mastery. She helps successful women answer the question, am I in the right relationship? But she's also a trained electrical engineer with a master's degree, which gives her a unique perspective when looking at emotionally charged relationship issues with a logical eye. So with that, Sherica, welcome to Influencers Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I got to say, I'm glad to have you. And, I'm just going to be honest. A lot of times when I think of relationship experts, there seems to be a segment of my brain that turns off, that I just don't get it. And especially when we're talking about emotions, relationships, that's when my eyes start glazing over. But the one thing that struck me about you, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on the show, is that you seem to be able to lay out the issues in a very concrete manner. That I get what you're saying. And I think a lot of that has to do with that background of yours in engineering. You have that kind of mind that I do think gives you a not just a unique perspective, but I think an advantage. And I think it also gives an advantage to the people that you work with. So I'd like to start with that. What kind of advantage do you think that gives you in the way that you help people with these types of issues?
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about my experience with that. I remember when I was younger, I was going through relationship issues like anyone else, and I remember people always telling me, "Oh, it'll just be okay," or just push through it, it'll all work out. And for me, that was so abstract. Like, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I really couldn't find anyone or find any books or anything that really kind of took me step by step into how to resolve my relationship issues, how to decide if I'm in the right relationship, how to work through X, Y, and Z. And so what I did for myself was, okay, Sherica, where are you right now and where you want to be? What are the steps you think it's going to take you to get there? So I started creating these steps because I problem solve like an engineer, because that's the exact those exact steps I take as an engineer. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what's the path to take you there? And as I tried different paths, I was able to say, okay, X doesn't work, but B does, or B, C, and D work in this order, but A, B, C doesn't. So I've been able to logically and strategically put things in an order that allows me to go from point A to point B. And that's where my engineering side kicks in, where I understand the emotions behind the relationship, the emotions that we as humans, we have, right? I don't think there's very few people out there who don't experience emotions. But I understand that from a woman's point of view, from a people point of view, but also problem-solving skills and being able to structure and organize and communicate that in a way that people understand. When I combine that, I think that gives me a superpower, so to speak.
Well, I think it certainly does, and I think you just demonstrated that. Use the words right in there that I was searching for, the abstract, because that's when people talk about their feelings. They do seem to do it in an abstract way, and you're doing it in a very concrete way. And I think, wow, you just put a spotlight on it right there in that answer. And I think people get what I was trying to say opening up this show. So let's start with, I think it's important to define success, because I talked a little bit about it in the opening that, successful people, we tend to think about them as financially successful, leaders in their field or their businesses, academically. Why is it that that's who is either you are drawn to work with, or those are the types of people, in my mind, it makes sense, that are drawn to you to work with when they come to relationship issues? Because I think a lot of successful people do tend to think in concrete terms versus abstract. So let's start with that. Define success in the framework of what you do.
Yes, I would actually keep your definition of success. There's the professional success, financially successful, academically successful. But the reason that I work with what we would term as the social standard for success, the reason I work with these type of people is because they may meet those successful terms according to society, but they rarely actually feel successful because they struggle in their relationships. And I know that because of what I went through. I know that because of some of the clients I work with. I mean, I have clients who make six figures, who are entrepreneurs, people who are engineers like myself, who constantly struggle with creating fulfilling relationships, maintaining relationships, or simply just getting out of their heads and learning how to relate and be open and be intimate in relationships. And what I've found is that when there's this disconnect between feeling successful and looking successful according to society, a lot of people tend to feel a little embarrassed about it. We don't really talk about it, right? Because when you're successful, you have it going on, you're kind of expected to have a good relationship. You're expected to have a relationship that reflects your material success. And when that doesn't match up, then there's this part of you that doesn't feel worthy, or you may feel like you're an imposter, or you just may feel embarrassed about it. And those are the type of people that I really want to work with, because the way you feel in one area of your life can actually hold you back in other areas of your life. So I work with people to overcome that.
And I guess that makes sense, because I guess they just have built up this, feeling that they need to protect themselves from showing weakness.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot of people that, again, I'm going to come from a guy's perspective, that I see on social media when something goes wrong, people that they have no problem just laying out their poor me story, and what was me. And I think sometimes maybe successful people versus I think one of the reasons they become successful is because rather than whining or lamenting about a problem, they seek a solution, and when they can't talk about it, that kind of impedes their progress there.
Yeah. And part of the reason they don't talk about it is because, like we said earlier, relationships have been so abstract to us, right? We don't actually have relationship classes in high school and middle school or college. But then you're successful because you're logical. You're successful because you're strategic. You're successful because of your, ambition, right? But when it comes to relationships, we sometimes forget you can apply that same structure and logic to your relationships, even though it is more of an abstract, more of an emotional type of discussion.
Well, one of the things that really that you put together so well is that you say you help successful women answer the question, am I in the right relationship? And I think most anybody, if they're going to be honest with themselves, have asked themselves that. I think whether they're been in a relationship for a month or 20, 30, 40 years, that's a question they don't really want to say out loud. So I think in order to, at least in my mind, to begin to answer that question, that we probably need to define, what is a mediocre relationship versus a good or great relationship, or even a bad relationship.
Yeah.
How do you define those?
Yeah. I would define a mediocre relationship as a relationship that's very unfulfilling. It's a relationship where you're not really unhappy, but you're not really happy either. You're kind of like straddling the fence, and you could take it or you could leave it. For lack of better terms, there's no passion, no excitement. There may be chemistry, right? You may have good moments, but overall, it just feels blah. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does, because one, it I guess if you're complacent or can't find a better solution, then you
that's what people
feel kind of stuck in that relationship. Where if you hate each other, right? If you're screaming and yelling and can't stand each other, well, that seems like an easier one to find a solution to. Or it's an easier relationship to identify that, this probably isn't good for me. I just got hit in the head with a pan. Probably don't need to be here. Because I notice when I listen to you and I read the stuff that you put out, I get this theme, this word compromise. Compromise or settle. Right? Because that's what you help people do, to stop settling or compromising, which sometimes is hard to do. I guess you can kind of relate to people that can't move to the next level of success in those other areas in their lives, is that they're comfortable, or at least they fool themselves into thinking they're comfortable. Would that be kind of a good description of what that mediocre relationship is?
Yes, and I do want to clarify one thing. There is a difference between compromising and settling that people don't really understand. When you settle for a relationship, that is coming from a place of defeat. It's coming from a place of exhaustion. It's coming from a place of, I really don't think I could have anything different or better. So when you compromise in a relationship, that's coming from a place of, you're having a conversation with your partner or a potential partner, and although you may like your steaks well done, and he likes his steaks rare, you're actually going to beat in the middle and say, we're going to do medium well, or medium rare, or medium, or something like that. Like, there is a give and take, but when you settle, you're just taking what you can get, versus saying, I want something more, or I want something different, or I'm willing to explore the possibilities. Does it make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, it's like, I'm just tired of thinking about it. I give up.
Yeah. It's better than having a toxic relationship. It's better than, I've actually had somebody say to me, well, at least he doesn't hit me. Well, it doesn't mean that this is the right, because they may have seen their parents be in an abusive relationship. They may have seen their friends go through divorce and have a bitter custody battle or something like that. And they're like, well, at least he doesn't do this, or at least she doesn't cheat on me, at least blah, blah, blah. When you have to start saying, well, at least he doesn't, that's probably a clue you may be settling.
Well, I think the question, am I in the right relationship, is probably a lot more, answering that is probably a lot more complex than the simplicity of the question. Yeah. And I would imagine that it probably has some sub-questions to that. So what are the variables? If somebody's wanting to determine if they're in the right relationship, what are some of those things that they need to look at to make that determination?
Yeah, there are several things, like you just said, but I try to focus on the top four things you need to look at. Number one, values. Number two, freedom. Number three, do you feel heard and valued? And number four, do you share the same vision of the future?
Okay, so well, that's a lot to take in, and I think the way that you broke those down, well, I guess it makes it easier to examine. So let's start off with values aligned, and I think as we are having this conversation, I think probably a good example of that is we're doing this day before Election Day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I would imagine values aligned, if you're sitting in a house that have a Democrat or in a Republican values, then that's probably a pretty big point of contention in a relationship. Right now, is that something that should be strongly considered determined, or is it something that can be that can be
compromised or worked
mitigated
on.
So I guess that right there is a good example of compromise versus settling, right? Is it something that can be worked through, or is it something that we need to go one way? And it could be anything. It could be, I guess, two different religions, things like that. So let's talk about that. The values align. What's the importance of that, and how significant is that in the equation?
Yeah, and when we say values align, we don't always mean values matching.
I think that's an important distinction.
Sometimes values can complement each other, yes. And so when we look at the example of different political preferences or different religious beliefs or different things that could drive your decision and how you operate, that is what you want to look at. So if I am Democrat and he is Republican, how do those beliefs drive my decisions that I make on a day-to-day basis? And how do those decisions affect me, affect the relationship, and affect the community that I live in? That's what I mean by how are your values aligned, because you could have different beliefs, but how do they act out in your life? Because I have seen relationships specifically between couples who are of different faiths, namely Christian and Muslim, who have been married for 30, 40, I think one couple has to be married for like 45 years now. And they have different religious beliefs, but their beliefs, how their beliefs drive their day-to-day actions, complement each other.
So I think that's really important, because you're talking about that the values don't have to match. But I guess they have to be, I don't know what the word be, compatible, coexist, because, a Christian and a Muslim, I mean, that takes work, right?
Yeah,
it takes, but it may be different than a Christian and a devil worshiper, right?
Yeah.
That may be a deal breaker, right?
Yeah. There has to be some similarity, some understanding, some, what's the other word I want to look for?
And I guess ability to respect the other's beliefs.
Yeah, respect. But if you feel so strongly about this person has to have this one value and it must be their top value, then okay, that is your deal breaker. But you have to understand that when you're going into a relationship, when you are in a relationship, and even while you are growing and developing throughout the relationship, how are your values changing? Because my top 5 values today may not necessarily be my top 5 values in 10 years, or they may have switched order or priority. So it's really good at this phase to understand your personal values, understand your partner's personal values, and then seek to understand.
And I guess, and not just understanding, but also maybe understanding their expectations, right? So you may not be asking them to bend, but you also have to know what, I guess, your pliability if they are asking you to bend. Yeah. And so the values aren't necessarily aligned, but I guess compatible. I guess, would that be what you're looking for? Compatibility of those values?
Compatibility, yes.
All right. So the next one that you talked about was
freedom.
Freedom. That's it. Yes. Yeah. Freedom.
And freedom is actually something we don't always talk about, or we talk about in different light. So I did a poll in my Facebook group, Relationship Success for High Achieving Women, and I asked them the question, why is it that when men describe or think about marriage, they think about ball and chain? And the reason I asked that question, because I want us, especially women, and I am talking specifically to women at this point, is to understand that relationships should not feel like bondage. Do you both value freedom? Freedom to be your individual selves and freedom to live as who you were created to be. That's why we talk about freedom. But it goes back to your statement earlier about expectations. What are your expectations out of marriage? What is your expectation for your relationship? Do you actually expect for someone to check in with you every day before they, leave work, come home from work, go to lunch? Like, some people require that, and for the other person, it may feel like bondage. So what does freedom look like to you in the realm of relationship?
So if my pet name for my wife is the Warden, would that be an indicator that?
Yes, that would be a bit of an indicator. Why do you call her the Warden?
Well, I didn't say I did. I just said if. It's very hypothetical.
Yes. But here's the flip side of that, too, is for some people, that's okay. It is perfectly okay that their wife takes more of a quote-unquote warden position in their relationship, because that is what they like and that is what they desire. The goal here is to not say what's right or wrong, but to understand what you need and desire in a relationship. How much freedom do you need?
So I think that's where a lot of relationships maybe have problems, when people get together, then all of a sudden one a person that party feels that maybe that means they're joined at the hips, that whatever they do together.
Yeah.
Right. At all times, versus they still can pursue their own hobbies, interests, that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about? Do you think that you still can do things individually as well as together?
Activities, and also, I would say, way of thinking. And the reason I bring this up, because there is some conversation between being dependent on your partner, having independence from your partner, and then there's another term called codependence. I'm sorry, not codependence, interdependence. I apologize, interdependence. So when people think about freedom, they think that, it means I'm completely independent. I don't really care what anybody thinks. I can do whatever I want to do. And then there's the concept of dependence, where you're literally attached at the hip. You think the same way, you move the same way. You may even dress the same way, have matching shirts, And then there's the interdependence part of, which is where we want our relationships to grow into, to where there is some sense of independence because you're still an individual person, but there are some things you have come together on and you agree upon, and you can still find freedom to be who you're created to be, because relationships should bring out the best in you. It should not bring out the worst in your relationships. There should be an evolution of who you are and an evolution of who you are as a couple. And that is where we want to work towards.
So again, I guess it comes back to that somewhat of a compatibility, and also not just am I free, but also the ability to respect the freedom of the other person. Well, to me, it seems like maybe the inverse is not just do you feel free, but I believe that you talk about do you feel heard and valued? Do
you feel heard and valued? Yes. And that has a lot to do with how you communicate and how well you listen. Because in relationships, they're typically mediocre or tipping on the edge between mediocre relationship and being a bad or a toxic relationship, has a lot to do with your level of communication. Do you respect each other with your words? Are you nurturing each other with your words? Are you intentionally listening to understand, intentionally listening to create intimacy, emotional intimacy, and mental intimacy? But oftentimes we talk at each other versus talking to each other. We're not really listening. We're just listening to the words that are being said, but not really listening to the heart of the person. So when I say, do you feel heard and valued? That is what we're talking about in your level of communication. Are your thoughts being valued? Are your feelings being valued? And are you doing the same thing for your partner as well?
And then to me, I think the toughest one that you mentioned to figure out is the future, the vision of the future. So what are some of the issues that that you see kind of crop up when you're looking at that question?
Yeah. So when we talk about the vision of the future, this definitely goes beyond, do you want to be married? Do you want to have kids? Do you want to live in the city or in the suburbs? We want to go a little bit deeper into that. Like, where do you as an individual see your life in 5 years? And where does your partner as an individual see his life in 5 years? And how does that intersect with each other? So, for example, if you're with a partner who actually desires to, let's say, retire at 40 years old and be able to travel the world every 3 or 4 months, that is a vision of his. That's what he wants to move towards. But your vision is more or less of, I want to retire when I'm 65. I don't want to start traveling the world until I'm 60, 65. Instead, I'd rather travel the United States. And it's little things like that that actually causes arguments in relationships, because people haven't actually talked about the vision that they have for themselves and where they see themselves in 5, 10, or 15 years in a much more granular level than what we normally talk about in open conversation. This gets down into your actual dreams and your hopes and your desires. This is the intimacy that we're talking about. This is the intimacy that you want to work on creating, especially at the beginning of your relationship, but also revisiting those hopes, those dreams, and desires occasionally throughout your relationship, because as you grow, as you evolve, so does your dreams, your hope, and desire. So you want to make sure that you both are still moving in at least the general same direction and not opposite directions. He wants to live on the East Coast and you want to live on the West Coast. That may be a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, and I guess that's where, the mind of the engineer makes a tremendous difference, because I think when I've listened to, a lot of relationship experts, it seems like the directive is, let's put blinders on and see how we can make this work. Right. Yeah. Rather than examining it. And sometimes that's futile, because I know a lot of times in newer relationships, people, maybe they fool themselves into, we can make this work. I can, I can change, or I can change them. And oftentimes that doesn't work. And I think we see that in, the divorce rate, I guess, in this country, people that maybe fooled themselves, up front. And I think the one thing that makes you unique is that you're not necessarily saying, look, there's only one path, and that's to try to make this work. You're open to the discussion or the examination that maybe this isn't right.
Absolutely. And I know that this is such a sensitive topic, but when you look at the information, when you look at the statistics for 2020, do you know that the number of people who are seeking divorce in 2020 is 34% higher than last year? I mean, when you look at that, that's a third increase. A third in a 1 year time period. That's
amazing. Now, obviously, we've had some stressful times this year, and maybe people spending more time together than they're used to. But do you think that it's the extra pressure, or do you think it's more of a that it actually puts the problems or the incompatibilities under a microscope that makes it easier to see?
Yes, and yes. Yes, I do think that a lot of it is the extra pressure that comes from job uncertainty, that comes from trying to keep yourself healthy, making sure you have your basic necessities like toilet paper and soap and sanitizer and things like that. But a good portion of it is the fact that the stresses the additional stresses that we're having has brought to the surface all of the issues that we have not addressed, all of the questions we have not answered over the last 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. It all comes to a head. And a lot of us have not equipped ourselves with how to handle the extra conflict. And that's really what it is. When you have a good foundation for your relationship, oftentimes you can work through things. But there are times where when the stresses, they do happen, our focus is proving who's right and who's wrong, and not actually asking the question, why does he feel this way? Or why does she feel this way? Why is she acting like this? Like asking the question why. And this is something that I laugh about myself, because I am always the first to ask why. Why are you doing this? Why is this such a big issue for you? Why is money such a big issue for you? Why are you afraid of this? Or why are you angry at this? Asking the question why, not from a place of questioning a person, but from a place of understanding. And that is how you end up working towards the solutions, when you understand the root cause of the problem, the root cause of their emotions, the root cause of their anger. Then you say, okay, now I understand you have this fear of being alone because your mom left you when you were 5, and then your dad, jumped ship when you were 10. You were raised by your grandmother for 10 years, and then she suddenly died. So you have this fear of being left alone. Now I understand why you always want to know where I am. But let's work on a compromise here, because I feel this way. So what can we do to make sure that you understand that I am still here, that I'm not going anywhere, and then I can also still feel as if I'm not on a short leash? Does that make a little bit more sense now?
It does. And I think you also uncovered another view to this, that am I in the right relationship isn't necessarily synonymous with am I in a perfect relationship?
Exactly.
Because I think a lot of people may be thinking that, oh, nope, I found this. We're not quite, nope, that's not just right. That's not, no, I'm not in the right relationship. So that's not what you're saying.
Right.
Because they're going to go off looking for something that probably doesn't exist.
Yep.
At that point. So let's talk about that. What are the differences? And I'm sure they can be subtle, the differences in understanding the right relationship versus this kind of fantasy perfect relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's probably comes down to what you're talking about, that compromise.
Yeah.
So now, after you've examined this, how do you determine whether this is a relationship worth pursuing and bettering versus one that is, you know what? I maybe should be looking to figure out a way to exit.
So let me give you a real life example. I remember at the beginning of my relationship, man, I actually asked myself this question: am I in the right relationship? Because there was an issue that had escalated to a full-blown argument at this time. And I thought it was a reflection of his character trait. I thought this was, something that just who he is, and this is not something I can live with. And so when we got to the root cause of the problem and we had the conversations to really understand why does he believe this particular belief, I had to ask myself, was this something I could live with? And he came back to me a day or two later, because we hadn't talked about breaking up or ending the relationship or anything like that. But he came back to me. He was like, I understand where you're coming from, and this is something I'm going to work on. And that is how you know that you're in the right relationship, where there is room for growth. You see, oftentimes you don't have to be perfect. He doesn't have to be perfect. She doesn't have to be perfect. But when something major is on the table and you guys have had a conversation about it, and the solution in the conversation requires personal growth from either you or from him, and that you or him, one of you or both of you, are willing to do the work on yourself to grow, to get to that next level of awareness, to get to that next level of strength, to get to that next level of personal accountability and personal discipline, that is how you know that you're headed towards the right relationship. If there's any relationship where where it's always finger pointing, where no one takes accountability, where there's no respect and there's no trust, then you want to question, am I in the right relationship? Now, if there are just things, well, he doesn't fold his socks the right way, he puts the toilet paper over instead of under, I can't deal with that, that's a deal breaker for me. Yeah, you're looking for a perfect relationship. You're probably not going to find that. But you also want to be careful of settling for the right now relationship, or the, what do you want to call it? The person who is good to me relationship, meaning that, you know, he takes you to all the nice restaurants, he pays for your trips, and, you know, he buys you these red bottom shoes. Like, he does all the things that you see in the romantic comedies on TV, right? The flowers every day and all this good stuff. So he's good to you. He makes you look good in the moment. But is that person good for you? How are you growing? How are you being supported? And that is where we go into the mediocre.
Well, it sounds to me like that it comes down to not whether it's perfect, you know, that we're talking about the folding the socks, and I would hate for that to be the what I'm judged on. But it sounds like it comes down to not, am I willing to compromise, or are they willing to compromise? It's really if you're both willing to compromise and find that meeting point in a realistic way. And I can't help but think, I keep thinking about, did you ever see the movie, was it What About Bob? I think it's from the 90s or something, but there was a moment in the movie he talks about why him and his ex-wife, it didn't work out. And he said, because, well, there's two types of people in this world. There's those who like Neil Diamond and those who don't. And if that's the criteria, then maybe you're not being realistic in the relationship. Right. So you laid out a perfect explanation for that, in that there is no perfect relationship. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit tactical. When someone works with you, you have the feminine success mastery. Can you walk us through, what is it that someone would expect if they went through, say, one of your courses or your coaching?
Absolutely. So when we work together in a coaching relationship, for example, because that's one of the most intimate programs that I have, we always start at the beginning, and we want to understand, number one, what is the issue you think you're having? And I say, what is the issue you think you're having? Because oftentimes, once we get finished digging deeper, it's something else. So there's this quote, and it's not attributed to anybody, but the quote says, you have to not only find your demons, but understand what your demons are feeding on. Ooh. And I know, right? And that's basically the first step that we do, is that we understand what is the issue and what's feeding that issue and why. What is the root cause? So there's this thing I learned in engineering called the root cause analysis. And
there it goes.
Part of the root cause, I know. And part of the root cause analysis model is the 5 whys. And you ask yourself, why? Why? You ask yourself the question why 5 times. And by the time you get to the 4th or 5th why is when you get down to the root cause. And then once we get to the root cause, we work to understand, why is this the root cause? So, for example, the root cause of the issue that you're having in a relationship right now could be abandonment. Let's understand the abandonment and what you're really afraid of. And once we understand what you're really afraid of, then we talk about, okay, when you're just by yourself, what are the thoughts that you're having? We talk to ourselves more than we talk to anybody else, because we constantly have thoughts in our mind. So what are the driving thoughts behind this fear? What are the driving thoughts behind this thing that's holding you back? Then once we understand the driving thoughts, we can work on creating a new possibility. That's one thing that a lot of us, we are really attached, emotionally attached and mentally attached to how we think things should go. And this is from someone who is an engineer who likes, to like things to be in order, to like to have just one way of doing things, because it makes my life simple, right? But oftentimes there's more than one way to do a thing. Like it says, more than one way to skin a cat. So if there is a different possibility for you, let's explore those possibilities. You may not have ever thought about a different way to communicate, or a different way to love your husband, or a different way to do X, Y, or Z, but there are always different ways. And so we look at the different possibilities that will get you to your desired solution. And based on who you are, based on your values, and based on who he is and his values, we then come to the best path to get you to the right solution.
Well, Sherica, I think what you just said perfectly defines why I consider you to be an influencer in this area, because that engineering mind, that scientific mind, in that you are seeking the truth, not what you want the truth to be, right? And I think that's where a lot of people make that mistake. That you keep looking for the answers that justifies what you want to be.
Yes, absolutely.
And so the benchmark for success in your programs isn't necessarily let's make what I have workable. It's let's determine if what I have is workable. And if not, let's find a different path that's going to, and ultimately, I think, even when sometimes I talk to people that did go through a divorce, and as painful as it was and hard as it was, both sides come out much happier people. And the people around them are much happier people. So do you continue with that path with the people that you work with? And that's probably a very tough position for you to be in, to have someone face the fact that I'm not in the right relationship, right? And something tells me that you don't say, okay, well, problem solved. I mean, no. I won't abandon them. So when you do that, do you look at okay, so let's try to make sure that we don't happen again, or let's figure out how we can be more particular, or how to identify whether we're heading in the right direction the next time?
Yes. So even before we get to that point, when someone says, you know what, I really am, based on this information, I am not in the right relationship, then the next step is having the conversation. And the conversation, for a lot of people, is the hardest part, because we automatically see ourselves as the villain when we have to break up with someone, right? When we bring to the table, I want to end the relationship, we see ourselves as the villain, and we don't like being the villain. And sometimes people procrastinate with having that conversation. So I work with them on how to have the conversation, how to have the confidence to have the conversation, and how to have the conversation in a way that's loving and in a way that's peaceful. Now, being peaceful doesn't mean it's going to be comfortable. Being loving and peaceful doesn't mean that it's going to go exactly the way you desire the conversation to go. But the key is to remain rooted and grounded into who you are, and rooted and grounded into the decision that you have made, and move forward in confidence from there. And so once they've made the decision and had the conversation, taking the next best steps for them, whether it's, if they're moving out or moving on, whatever the case is, now let's look at how did we get here? How do we get in that relationship? And what parts of you do we need to work on so that we don't repeat these mistakes in the next relationship?
Well, yeah, because I think that's got to be a really tough thing to do. I guess the old it's not you, it's me doesn't work anymore.
No, let me tell you, it does. It happened to me. Someone said that to me.
But I guess the real tricky part is that I think a lot of people look for scripts on how to do this, but I guess the problem is, you may can provide someone a script on how to in that, but you can't necessarily provide them with a script to give to the other person to follow as well. Not
at all. I think the most important thing is your posture, is your, what do I want to say? Not your physical posture, not just physically sitting up straight, but you coming from a place of really caring about that other person, because one of the things that helps soften the blow is to know that someone cares, versus if you just say, well, it's not you, it's me. Like, hold on, wait a minute. What does that mean? Like, that comes across as a scapegoat versus saying, I've really given this some thought, and it's been a gut-wrenching experience for me. And although I really love you and I want the best for you and for us, I do not think this relationship is going to be the best for both of us in the long term. And the reason I think that are these things. And my approach is always from, let me share with you the information, and then I'm going to share with you how I feel about this information. And that's kind of where I coach people to gather the information that supports your decision. And then present that information, let them know, how do you feel about it? And then ask them, how does he feel about it? And then just kind of go from there.
And I think that's a very tricky path to navigate. But the way that you just laid that out, it would be very tough for someone to respond with, oh, yeah, well, you're wrong.
And he can if he wants to, right?
But it seems like it'd be very tough to argue with that, because you're not presenting it in an argumentative, we're leaving because you do this, you do this, you do this. Right. Right? Wow, that's
right. You could say, I don't feel valued because, over the last few months, every time I did something that I thought was a loving act, I did not feel it was well received. It always ended up in arguments, always ended up in me crying, always ended up in A, B, and C. That's how you present information without saying it's your fault, you're a bad influence on me, and I don't want to be with you anymore. Let's not do that.
Well, I never really have thought of ever leaving my wife, but I would like to figure out a way to take advantage of this information. No. I mean, I don't think anybody would do that. I'm not sitting here feeling like, boy, it's a shame I don't have someone to leave. I could. But let's take the opposite way.
Not a pleasant experience.
Well, it occurred to me. Do you ever work with or would the the strategies or the things that you teach and help people with, would it help if someone came to you and said, Sherica, I'm not in a relationship right now, but boy, it sure sounds like this would help me in making some mistakes.
Yeah.
As I'm looking, would that be valuable for them to go through?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that because the time that you're not in a relationship is one of the best times for you to do some of the inner work. And a lot of that work could be identifying and what do I want to say, increase or nurture your own personal relationship with yourself, as well as let's work on some of the mistakes you think you made in your past relationship. Again, go through my root cause analysis, the 5 whys, and then how can we course correct that? Then if you're ready for dating, then let's go through the dating process now, where you're getting out and you're meeting different people, and how do you date effectively? How do you collect the data about the different men that you're meeting? And then what do you do with that information? And then hopefully we move them to a relationship.
I can see where that'd be much easier when your judgment is clouded with the current turmoil. That you're going through. This is truly fascinating. And I think, so, anyone that's listening to it, it's just, so refreshing to listen to this in that concrete, non-abstract. Well, because I got to say, and this is probably my own flaw, but I do glaze over when it's all based on feelings, and the science or I've never really put these terms together, but the mathematics of a relationship, it makes sense.
Yeah, it can make sense. I mean, relationships, they can be challenging. We're not going to sugarcoat that, right? But when you understand that your feelings and your emotions, they are the conduit of information that you need to take in and understand what that information is. Like, if you are feeling angry, that's giving you information. Something is not right. If you are feeling disturbed or frustrated, that information is saying, oh, something is frustrating me, something is not in alignment with my values or in alignment with my character. Your feelings and your emotion is just a conduit for information. So we shouldn't dismiss our feelings, shouldn't dismiss our emotions, accept them, understand them, listen to them, but listen to actually what they're telling you instead of letting your feelings and your emotions dictate how you show up. You use your emotions and your feelings as a tool, as information.
Well, I have to say this has just been a tremendous conversation and enlightening. How can someone find out more about Sherica Matthews and how to get involved in the things that you have going?
The best way is going to be connect with me through my website, ShericaMatthews.com. That is where you're going to find my blogs and my vlogs. That's where you'll find, I have a video on there about the top 5 reasons women are in mediocre relationships. That's definitely something that I would encourage people to watch. And that's where you'll also find information on my coaching and my courses. But I would say if you really want to be active and involved with me, join my Facebook group. My Facebook group is called Relationship Success for High Achieving Women. That is going to be the place where you're going to get the support, the encouragement, and the information, regardless of if you're single right now, if you are in a relationship, or if you're married. This group is specifically geared towards making sure that you have at least the basics of what it takes to be in a successful relationship. Well,
I got to say, Sherica, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing so much valuable information. It's really going to make a big difference, I think, in a lot of people's lives.
Thank you so much for having me here. This was just a really fun conversation for me. Relationships is something I am so passionate about because I believe relationships, they really form the foundation of the life that we live, because I believe that if relationships weren't important, then God would only make one person at a time. He would not have made a world full of people and not intend for us to have relationships.
And so many different people. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we'll definitely check out ShericaMatthews.com. We'll have a link to that on the show notes, as well as to the Relationship Success for High Achieving Women Facebook group. We'll have a link to that on the show notes as well. So until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today.